In 1949, Mental Health America launched Mental Health Week to educate Americans about mental illness and mental health. This has since grown to the Mental Health Awareness Month that we know today. You can learn more about Mental Health America by visiting MHAnational.org. Many organizations choose to host awareness observations that coincide with Mental Health Awareness Month. And so in light of that and just the many changes that we've all had to face and adapt to both personally and professionally as architects and designers, DFW NOMA, we just wanted to join in on the wellness awareness and take a closer look at the world of architecture versus mental health. Starting at square one, where it all begins, architecture school. Our panelists of students and recent graduates are going to talk about the life of the architecture student. Next week, we are going to graduate to a panel of very decorated architecture professionals. And then we will follow up these two discussions the third week and hear from our licensed mental health professional to get their input and feedback from our first two discussions. And I mean, I'm looking forward to that one because we are taking architecture to the proverbial couch, okay?
As Rain mentioned, we'll be engaging in a month-long series of panel discussions. So very excited about what we'll be able to share and hear from our student and alumni panelists, our professionals, and then ultimately our mental health professional panel.
Architecture school is known to be stressful and a lot more stressful than most other degrees. Definitely, it's considered the most time consuming with an average of 22 hours a week spent on homework. It's also definitely ranked in the top 10 hardest degrees that you can possibly go after. You run into issues like lack of sleep, lack of time. And there's also segregation and isolation from the rest of the university that in talking to you all previously, I've heard about.
One of the hardest things is definitely the time that it takes. When anyone asks me, are they interested in architecture or, going to school and majoring in it, that's definitely the first things that I tell them is, it's not necessarily, if you have a passion for it, I wouldn't say it's a difficult major, but it is a time consuming major, and that's what makes it difficult. So I think that definitely was one of the largest stresses, and it's because of the other things that also come with school, right? So activities, balancing, and your activities, your friendships. So I think that was definitely something that definitely separated a lot of the people. And even within architecture, those early years, especially freshman year, I saw many people leaving because they just didn't know how to balance or didn't want to give up certain things. When they get into college, they're excited for their freshman year. So that's definitely, I think, a big stressor in school.
That we are socially isolated as architecture students because of the time commitment. It's so hard to be able to, connect with other students once you get into studio years because you're always away, you're always doing studio work, you're kind of separated from the rest of the university. And so that was something that I really struggled with. Also feeling like I didn't necessarily belong in our architecture school because there's such a lack of diversity, and being a minority and being a minority woman was very isolating for me. It was hard to kind of get into the culture because a lot of people maybe were more confident or they had parents who had gone to the school and they could connect over things that maybe I couldn't connect over. And so something that I really sought out was being involved in cultural organizations and finding people that I could really, find a home with, people that I could connect with culturally. And that wasn't really something that I could find in the School of Architecture. So I needed to find people outside of the school. And then that became difficult when you had to balance leadership roles in those organizations. And then also being away, having to study and do projects really late at night. So that was something that was really stressful, trying to balance that. And also not really getting the recognition for doing work outside of the school because people don't see it. And there's this pressure to constantly be focused on architecture. And so when you do other activities and succeed in other ways, sometimes that doesn't always get recognized within your school. And that's something that was also very stressful and also somewhat invalidating throughout my years.
So I joined the honors college, and that's where I found my people in a way that were constantly supportive and things like that. But through the honors college, I guess that added like another stressor to just like my overall experience. One, because faculty was not the most supportive of students being in the honors college. Oftentimes, faculty would be like, well, why would you want to spend more time, working on this one class when you should be focusing on your other classes as well? Like, there was just not that validation of like, you're doing more, like that's a good thing. It's more of, well, put your focus on like this one thing and that will be enough. To me, that was really discouraging, especially as a freshman.
I do want to start with, I graduated with my bachelor's at Purdue A&M, as you mentioned earlier, which is a historically Black college. And so I did have that amazing benefit of not only were the students very diverse, but our faculty was as well. And so I at least can say that that was definitely a great benefit that I had in my undergrad. Now my master's was kind of polar opposite. My husband and I were the only African Americans in the master's program that year. So it definitely was very different, but I think having that ground at a HBCU, I think really, or at least took away some of the insecurities that I think that kind of come from being a minority and in certain areas. I specifically had one professor who, when students would, come to her and say, hey, we are really struggling with, balancing, like just being very honest, and open. And she would literally tell us all, architecture is life. And that was her kind of her excuse with everything. And it came to the point where it's like, we were, I think, third, fourth year at that time. So it's like, hey, we passed through the first few semesters. We're not just complaining to complain, okay? Just, is there a way that I can meet with you? And she told me to quit. That was her answer to everybody, was to quit. And that beat me down because that was a scholarship, so I wasn't just doing that so that I, for fun. I was also doing that so that I could continue to go to school. You just never know how many, what an opportunity, just because it's outside of architecture, you could be taking away opportunities for students. So I think sometimes it's not done in the best way. And in an encouraging way.
There's a statistic out there that only 2/3 of architecture students actually end up graduating because of all those stresses. I mean, you can only hear just quit so many times before you do, because there are easier careers out there.
I think being a student, it's especially in architecture, professors tend to kind of neglect personal issues because when you're in the school so long, and you're all striving for career goals. Like I feel like people in architecture school are very committed to their careers. You have to be committed, and you have to be passionate about what you're doing. But then sometimes that gets kind of disguised by professionalism, or they say it's because it's a competitive field, or this is just a rigorous program. And then the expectation is just for people to drop out. And then having those kind of imposed on you from the very beginning is definitely not great for student mental health. And that's something that, is being brought up now. And this is great that we're having these kinds of conversations. How important like having a NOMAS chapter and having a support group is in the school. And that's very much the reason why I wanted to create a NOMAS chapter at OSU, because that's something that was missing for me. And I know it's just knowing that you have a few people and having connections to upperclassmen, and seeing other people that look like you or have gone through similar struggles really helps, because sometimes the professors, there's only so much they can do. It's very important to just have other peers and other students you can connect with, and that's really why I'm so passionate about NOMA and NOMAs, because it's just that support group for minorities. And I mean, AIS is also out there, but I think having one specifically dedicated, to minorities is something that's so needed and just representative.
I can relate so much because being a first-time generation or first-generation college student, and being the only one in my family to even pursue a college degree. My parents and nobody in my family knew anything about college applications, scholarships, how to even pay for it. I mean, organizations. So the importance of organizations within the school actually helped me a lot because, like some of the panelists are saying, you're able to voice out some concerns and relate and share the passions that you have for why you're in architecture, because keeping that in mind whenever things get tough helps see you in the future, because I mean, otherwise architecture can be very painful.
The pandemic obviously has just created a lot of stress for a lot of people, and a lot of mental health issues have come out of it for regular people. But I think that has also been compounded for architects and architecture students, because it's a heightening of a lot of the things we've talked about, of isolation, of stress, of just unrealistic expectations, probably, because we've all been expected to keep working like everything's the same, but everything is not the same.
Yeah, I can lead the question since I'm in the professional field now, and I was most affected by it because of the pandemic. Of course, work kind of slowed down. And when I was working at this architecture firm, I mean, the clients started getting weary and fear of the effects that it would have on their projects, like hotels, retail projects. They laid off 4% of the company in where I was, and I was one of the lucky ones. So I think I lasted like maybe a month or 2 months without a job, and but at the same time, between being laid off, I was doing things outside of architecture that I never thought I would do, because I mean I had to find something to do. I was not gonna sit around. So this is how the pandemic affected me directly. But some of the trends that I've seen that the pandemic brought was this routine of working from home. I mean, I can see it as a great thing at some aspects, but I can also see it as a detractor, because I'm actually working from home right now part-time, and I go to the office 2 days a week. So I like the flexibility of the new schedule. So I think some companies that see the benefit of employees having that option would keep that as an option for
all of our efforts that we had, like from the beginning of the semester up until that point. They're just gone, essentially. We had a whole new project that was totally unrelated to what we had previously done. You know, I was taking structures at the time, and learning structures online was just very confusing, and you know, just adjusting to the whole technology side of it was also just quite stressful. Studio culture is obviously not the same. So on Monday, that was like the first time that I saw all my classmates in basically like a year. We didn't have our jury in person last semester or semester prior. So it was really, it was a strange kind of situation, because I hadn't had a jury in person in a long time. So getting adjusted to that, and then also making like models. I made like 3 models this semester. So going from just digital models to back to digital and physical, like it was all just.
It was honestly a very anxious time, because there's just a lot of not knowing and not having, you know, a professor to even be able to tell you exactly what to do, because they didn't know either. So I think like the pandemic really helped to highlight, you know, everything that's wrong within like the way things are running right now, and how much we need to focus on like supporting students. There are funds, our school has funds, like why are they not being allocated correctly? Why are there students dropping out? Why are most of those students minority? So it really just like fueled our passions for social justice and for creating our NOMA's chapter, really due to like the pandemic and people being able to take time and like reflect on how things are going and how things need to be changed.
Something that really helped me was of course, finding things outside of architecture, because it will get to a point. I mean, I did 6 years straight of architecture, and at a point it got to, I feel like I'm just going to the architecture building and going back home and going to the architecture building and going back home.
I actually have a list of books that I would like to read on my free time. So I try to read other things outside of architecture that bent my mind to other things. So yeah, I definitely like reading and doing other things outside of architecture. And sketching. Sketching helps me a lot for some watercoloring.
I honestly, I try to keep up with like the NBA. I'm a huge basketball fan, and even when I'm like making models or working on things, like I'll have it just playing in the background. That's kind of like my de-stressor.
I find that it fluctuates often. Like sometimes you're just too busy, but then sometimes you get so busy that you say, I really need a break.
Yeah, I can definitely say that I don't have everything together, but I think one thing that like in terms of mental health, sometimes people just think of, oh, you need to make time to have fun, but also sometimes, especially with students that are nervous about or have anxiety, like even high function anxiety, it's hard to make yourself be able to do that because there's pressure that you need to be productive all times of the day. But like I definitely think that you need to have something, like Mariah said, outside of architecture to make you feel like you've accomplished something. Like to find a life outside of architecture, something, some enjoyment or some organization, so you can feel like you're human and that, you know, there's a world out there and you can meet new people and like see different perspectives that aren't stuck in the studio building all day. Just making time for yourself and feeling okay. Like you don't have to be productive all the time. Like that's not okay to like always be working. And that's something that sometimes you have to like reach a certain point to realize that like people saying to self-care doesn't always get across to everyone, but it's something that you have to constantly remind yourself that it's okay to take a break.
The other day, the phrase you used, I am human, I actually had to use that with someone when explaining why I wouldn't get something done. And I was just like, it's not going to happen. I'm human. Like that's it. I cannot do everything you want me to do right now.